give you no exact price?
No, let's say there's no price, right?
Yeah.
If you use the park, like it's still there. If you use sandwich, it's gone. So like if you're buying a good, a private good, and you use it, it's gone. Whereas a park and public goods, usually they're still there, even after you use something
Right.
else is gone.
Good point. For one thing, it's non-rivalrous. So if I use the good, it doesn't mean you can't use the good or anybody else can't. So the consumption, we can't measure the consumption. I guess we could say, well, you can go to the park a number of times. But let's say we're measuring the value of the park. There is one park, right? And we choose as individuals to use it or not use it, or use it more often. So in this case, quantity is fixed. With the private case, price is fixed. These are private goods, and the price is set at some level, and we choose to consume or not. The price might be zero for a park, but the quantity is also fixed. There's one park. So the quantity is a certain amount. Quantity is fixed. And when we want to add up the value of that, we basically have to ask every individual, what is your willingness to pay for the park? Whether they're going to pay or not. What is the value of the park to you? So what we do then is the first person has some value, the second person has some value. So we can add value in terms of, we do it vertically. And so we're adding value this way, right? And what we can come up with is some sort of demand curve that gives you some point. This demand curve is really not the same as this one. This is willingness to pay. This is thinking at the margin, right? That's an individual, that's the willingness to pay at that point. What we have here is individual willingness to pay. We add it up, and when we come to this magic number, this is total value. Right? On this one, it's price. Here it's total value. So it's a different picture. The economics are different if you're talking about public goods. So who cares? The point is, when we take natural resources or environmental goods, we don't have prices in a lot of cases. So how do we allocate them to make society better off? Do we want more or less? Fewer? Do we want to charge? What's the price? Do we create more areas? Do we take a cheap white cap and we make another area somewhere else? We need to know what society's value for that is. And without prices, it's hard to tell. So what we often try to figure out is, what is the value? First of all, the total value, which does us no good. We really tried to figure out what's the willingness to pay, or the marginal value. What are the marginal benefits we're going to get in using taxpayers' dollars to create more public goods, or to close some public goods, or not use certain areas. So it's a little bit different thinking. Okay. No questions?
Is it possible to kind of ask every person?
Is it possible to ask every person? Yeah, we do survey. If you're interested in survey research, there's tons of it. And I've done a couple in the States with respect to fire. And people biking and hiking through areas that had been burned, prescribed burned. And we asked their willingness to pay to hike in an area that was charcoal versus an area that was green and overgrown. And so you sample the population, you come up with willingness to pay, you can come up with the total value and the consumer surplus, and then make recommendations to the government to close a trail, spend money rehabilitating a trail, or doing prescribed burning. You either burn in this place or that place, depending on whether you're increasing public values or decreasing. So that's the way to do it. You mostly have to ask people. And that's what I switched. We're going to be talking about how to do that, how to estimate those values after we're done this stuff.
But I had a question.
Yeah.
But there's always bias in the survey. Say, for example, if I like to do it to drive around in a green area,
yeah.
I would say, because obviously I know I'm actually not paying this, I just have to say it, so I can say $100,000
Yep.
when I know I'm not getting the bill.
That's survey research is highly criticized for that, and the idea is when you ask somebody their value, how much is this area worth to you? They're not gonna say, maybe they're only willing to pay 20 bucks a year to use the area, but because they don't have to pay, depending on how you ask the question, they might say $1 million, you know, and so they inflate the value. There's ways of getting around that. It's not perfect, but when you ask a hypothetical question, you get a hypothetical answer. So, right. Let me see. That also brings up another issue. You know about the free rider problem? With public goods, if you're asking somebody to pay for something, you're asking for donations for a public good, then what kind of incentive do you have to pay for it? Do you have an incentive to pay for it? Why not?
Someone else will.
Yeah, you expect somebody else will. Anybody listen to public, what is it, that local station, CFCR? No? All right then. Well, they just had a fundraising thing. So, PBS, NPR, CBC, anybody listen to public anything? Sometimes, okay. So, it's not that popular. Anyway, the free rider problem has to do with people not paying. So, how do you get past that? You have to think about enforcement, exclusivity. If you can make something exclusive, you get rid of the free rider problem. Okay, let's move on. The second one, short, lack of a market. It's hard to call this market failure when there is no market, but it falls into this category in some textbooks. So when you have lack of a market, you do not have a mechanism by which to bring people, suppliers and consumers together. Producers and consumers. Think of examples, and there are quite a few, where we don't have a market for something, which results in degradation, depletion, pollution, where we are exploring markets to be able to solve environmental problems. You think? Give me some examples.
Pollution markets for like emissions.
Carbon markets. Right? There's carbon exchanges all over the place now. And so you need government intervention for that. In a situation like that, you need regulation, you need some infrastructure, you need some rules and enforcement. So typically you start with enforcement where you create the demand for a permit. So if you're a company and you need to pollute, you have to buy a permission, you have to buy a permit to pollute. Then, when that happens, you have, you give rise to supply. So the demand gives rise to supply, and you have a market, you have a mechanism for trading. Carbon markets are a good example. What else are we trying to do using markets?
Reduce waste
Waste?
and like make it more efficient because there'd be less waste that people are paying.
Yeah, there's garbage markets, right? New Jersey takes all of New York's garbage for a price. So you can create a market for practically anything. Think of the articles you read last week, last class. Were there situations where there wasn't a market? Who had papers that markets were created where none existed? Anyone? Governments? Well, the barrier reef one that nobody read was. Or was it reefs off the coast of Water markets, the guy talking about the beer and the water footprint in Montana, there was no real good market there. Water was allocated based on tradition. You use it or lose it. Had nothing to do with markets. You could not sell your right. So that example, what was his name? Mark Harmon or something? Harmon, I don't remember his first name. So they actually created a market. They created a demand, a permitting system, and allowed trade. When you have the lack of a market, what key property right are you missing? What are the components of property rights that we talked about? Or that I talked about and you listened to? The ability to transfer rights. When we create markets, we create a mechanism to trade. That's what markets are. So if you allow people to trade, trading provides value, value provides incentives. And so when we don't have markets for things like pollution, air, clean air, certain types of water, and we are able to create a market, what we are doing is looking at the property, we're taking this property rights aspect one step farther, and we're assigning rights to be able to transfer goods. When you do that, transferring creates value, value creates incentives to look after things, and you get closer to sustainability than you were without a market. Okay? Moving right along. Lack of information. How can lack of information be market failure? How would not having enough information lead to market failure?
If the company does not disclose its information, its balance sheets, say if in reality it's bankrupt and it actually says that we are making huge profits, then the stocks will continue to go up while the company is actually bankrupt.
Okay, so if a company doesn't disclose information, then you might be persuaded to buy its stock. So you're paying for something, there's a price, and what's the value of what you're getting? There's a marginal cost and marginal value. They don't equal, right? So if you don't have information, like let's take my GVC recorder. I bought it thinking it was worth $500 and it turned out to be worth $0. And so you have the price equals 500 and you have the marginal benefit I got out of it, big squat, nothing. Is there market failure? Yes, because the marginal benefit doesn't equal the marginal cost. So anytime you have lack of information, you might pay too much, you might not pay enough. The reverse is true. You can have greater benefits than costs. Used cars. I had a grad student who had a girlfriend. He brings a girlfriend from Germany, loves this woman for about 2 months, buys her a car, and he bought the car from some guy in the paper. The car worked wonderfully from his house from the seller's house to this guy's house. Drove the car home, at which point it never moved again, right? He paid $800 for this car because he liked this girl so much. And the car just crapped out. The marginal benefit did not equal the marginal cost. He had no recourse. He could not take it back because he bought it. It was a private sale, buyer beware. So how do we, as a society, prevent this from happening? How do we try to improve this situation and go to the point where marginal cost equals the marginal revenue or the price? Right? This is what we're aiming for all the time. So how do we deal with lack of information? The internet? Yeah, we can do research. Right? That's ourselves. We can do that ourselves. So that's an individual response. What else do we do?
Government regulations.
Yeah, there's government regulations about full disclosure. And this could be with banks, with big companies, with real estate. If you buy a house and the basement floods next week, and the owner knew that the basement was flooding all the time, the owner's on the hook for it. If the owner didn't know, well, you're sort of screwed. But there's rules and regulations about imparting information to help us arrive at this point. So there's no waste and there are no problems. Lemon laws, you buy a car from a dealer and it craps out, you have a certain amount of time and you can actually take that car back for a full refund. They're called lemon laws. Give me some other examples. You guys are just so on your game today. It's like the 10 o'clock thing, or is it just this class?
You just investing to other countries.
Pardon?
Investing something to other countries.
Yeah. More information. Basically, any kind of regulation that increases the information to let you make an informed decision is one step towards addressing market failure.
What about like certification?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, that's a good one, actually. Certification is a good example. You know, whether it's certified organic or green or whatever, provides that information for you to be sure that your products are safer, your products come from a production process that you're paying for. Return policies. You know, you buy something at Sears and they have this 100% satisfaction guaranteed thing. If they ever don't take anything back, just bust out that phrase and they will take it back. Best Buy, of course, doesn't have the same policy. Okay? So any of these things help for lack of information. Just go.